The Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, is now convened. Members, you would remember that on Thursday, February 10, 2022, the House of Representatives, by resolution, referred the estimates of expenditure for 2022-2023 for the financial year ending 31st March 2023. The Jamaica Public Bodies Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2023, the Government of Jamaica Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year ending for the financial year 2022 to 2023, the Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy for the financial year 2022-2023 to the financial year 2025-2026. The revenue estimates 2022 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023, the tax expenditure statement 2022 and 2022 to 2023 public sector consolidated estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023. These were referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all the members of the House, for consideration and report. This committee is ready to start its deliberations, and I now ask the Leader of the House to inform us on how we will proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The tradition, of course, of leading off with the Minister of Finance, making his statement and a response from the opposition spokesman on finance, will precede the full examination of the budget on and I would like to suggest, Madam Speaker, having regard to the fact that the budget has already gone through the key areas of examination by the Auditor General's Department over the period, that members seek to discuss in general and perhaps avoid the line by line, but rather subject by subject, so as to enable an expeditious execution of the process. Madam Chair, we really have 2 days that we want to complete the examination of this budget, and I would urge that members are efficient in the use of their time in enabling this process to be completed. So Madam Chair, I now invite you to ask the Minister of Finance to do his opening, to be followed by the opposition spokesman.
For this, Chair, I don't have, just have a paragraph in terms of an opening statement. Just, you know, the estimates of expenditure provide a total spend of 912 billion, which is 2.1% more than program for the fiscal year that's ending. And this amount comprised of non-debt recurrent expenditure of 539.5 billion, capital expenditure of 65.1 billion, and debt service of 307.5 billion. The public body's estimates of revenue and expenditure for financial year 22-23 indicates an overall spend of 466.3 billion, comprised of recurrent expenditure of 384.9 billion, capital expenditure of 70.7 billion, and amortization of 10.6 billion. The government's planned expenditure for fiscal year 22-23 is therefore 1,378.2 billion, or 55.64% of GDP, inclusive of debt service.
Madam Speaker, I don't have a detailed opening statement. The comments that I intend to make, I prefer to do when the Minister and the Financial Secretary and the team is here.
Thank you. Minister, team, we will begin with head number 01000, the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, we have some general questions on the budget first before we go into the detailed heads. We always do that.
That's what you're saying. And you're saying you
Can,
as he goes along.
the minister is at liberty to involve whoever other ministers he wishes. So OPM, for example, he could ask them to sit with him.
We have some general
So we will have the
questions
general
on the
discussion. Yes, indeed. While he's there in the chair. Right, okay. Proceed.
Minister, there are a number of assumptions in the... Should I wait till the other members come in? Or?
Yes, please.
Sure. And while you wait,
Madam Chair, while we do that,
So-
I think member should appreciate also that there is a substantive Ministry of Finance examination which we'll have to follow, where the budget is essentially enhanced. Just to guide the efficiencies that... Member, we don't want to stay here until Friday.
And Chairman, if I can, through you, just advise members that some amendments have been tabled, that at the end of the Standing Finance Committee proceedings, we would ask that the amendments are a part of the approval. No, it's it's going to be something like this, but there are lots of schedules behind it. It doesn't change the. It does not change the totals.
Minister of Finance,
but
not hearing you very clearly.
just allocations within certain ministries.
Okay, so
But it will be circulated.
for the benefit of all the members, my understanding was that we would start with an abbreviated introduction, which I heard very briefly from the Minister of Finance, followed by opposition spokesperson on finance who indicated that he would have fulsome discussions as we go through the sections generally. That was my understanding. So we are going to start our deliberations on Office of the Prime Minister.
No.
Madam Chair.
No. We normally have a general discussion
still gonna
around
go
the
to the
budget.
general before?
Yeah, and then we go to the head. So I will ask the general questions now before we go line to the specific heads.
I thought you would have asked the discussion before calling.
That's an opening. This is an opportunity to ask questions.
Questions now.
So,
we're quite comfortable with it, as long as I said, it is not protracted, because you do have the...
You're making it more protracted.
Chairman, let me make the point, would you? The fact is you do have the substantive subject of the Ministry of Finance at which the general questions relating to the budget can be had. But we're allowing, we're just saying, please, let's be efficient with it. Okay.
Madam Chair, I can assure you the opposition doesn't intend to delay the proceedings, but we have an obligation to ask the questions, and we're going to do that. All right, could I proceed, Madam Chair?
Opposition spokesperson on finance actually have no issue. What happened because of the abbreviated discussion had while the finance minister was sitting here, and you're indicating that you would have deferred for the detailed discussion. I was of the view that you were ready to start calling the heads. No. So, having called in the Office of the Prime Minister, I figured you were going straight into deliberation. For the Office of the Prime Minister, we are going to do some summary deliberations and questions before we go into your specific head. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I have some questions re some of the assumptions in the budget and some concerns that some of the assumptions that have been made are not realistic given what is happening now, both locally and globally. I would start with looking at the projected oil prices. In the projection for 22-23 is an average oil price of $67.5 per barrel. When this would have been tabled, oil prices were already in the early $90, and they're now $95, and there's a fair bit of volatility given the issues in Ukraine. Last year, when you tabled the budget, you had projected oil prices at $45 per barrel. They have ended up at $73, which is about 50% higher than the projection. So my first question to you would be, what impact has the differential in the actual oil prices versus the projected had, particularly on tax revenue collections and the balance of payments? And secondly, what would be the basis for setting a price of 67.5 for the next fiscal year, given all the issues that exist internationally and what are likely to happen in the next couple of weeks and months? So that's my first question.
Okay, so just relating to the current year, the first point to be made is that the price that matters from a budgetary point of view is the average price that obtains throughout the year and not a peak price. Okay? So with respect to last year, after all is said and done, after all that's happened with oil prices, Jamaica ended up, and it's in the fiscal policy paper, with a very positive balance of payments result, in that our, I'm looking for the page number here in the fiscal policy paper. Our
page
balance
14.
Page 14. Our balance of payment, our current account deficit was just, no, current account, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong column. Current account surplus. We ended up with a surplus last year. So that is to say that, you know, at the end of the day, though average oil prices were elevated in comparison to what the average was assumed to be, we ended up with in a positive current account situation and a very healthy balance of payments position. With respect to this year, at the time these numbers were presented, this was tabled on the 10th of February. I don't think oil prices were in the 90s, but what was here was the projection for the average oil prices over 12 months, and that's informed not simply by what we may believe, but it's informed by taking data and information from published sources that we have relied on over a long period of time. Now, clearly, there's a situation that's unfolding in the Ukraine that will impact the global economy and will likely have an impact on Jamaica. And that impact is likely to be through three channels, one of which is the channel of commodity prices, where we can expect in the short term for oil prices to rise in the short term, even though we'd expect at some point during the year for there to be some retreat in those prices. The average price, we don't believe, will be the average price and the peak price. Obviously, there will be a differential between those two. But we do believe that it is possible that the average price for the year it could be higher than the average price that's assumed here. So, as I said, the Ukraine crisis, three channels, the commodity channel, and other channels as well.
All right. And we were 50% off last year, and I mean, even if...
No, I don't know. I don't know.
No, I'm looking at...
last year.
No, I'm looking at, if you look at the same table, for 21-22, you projected on average to be 73.3, the same table. In the third column from the left, you had projected $45. That's all I'm saying. So I know the balance of payments ended up, your current account ended up positive. I'm just saying there was a variance of that. I want to go to inflation. The projection for inflation for the next 3 fiscal years is 5%. And let's just take 22, 23 as an example. Given the notes from the BOJ coming out of their last monetary policy meeting, they have indicated that they expect inflation to remain elevated, certainly for this calendar year. I think everybody expects it to moderate at some point towards the end of the year. But again, I would ask the basis on which this 5% is projected, given everything that, even before the Ukraine crisis, I would say the 5%, I wouldn't consider it to be realistic. And I ask within the context of the clearly stated BOJ's policy of increasing interest rates as a way of moderating inflation, and each 1% increase in interest rate adds $6.5 billion to the debt. So the having higher than expected inflation, which may lead to higher than expected interest rates, has a direct impact on your debt servicing charges. So I would ask the basis for the 5% projection for the next fiscal year.
Okay, the first thing to for you to be aware of is that the macro projections that inform the budget, those are derived in consultation with the BOJ. In fact, they come from the BOJ, from the Bank of Jamaica, and the Ministry of Finance, has a dialogue to interrogate and to make sure it's satisfied that they are worthwhile projections. Now, the projection for inflation here, and clearly I have already acknowledged that with the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, the macro environment has certainly changed in the short term, but that change in the short term can influence the evolution of the average over the fiscal year. But the inflation that is stated here is inflation for the fiscal year. So that would be from April 1st, 2022 to March 1st, 2023. The BOJ has certainly communicated that certainly for the first 7 or 8 months of this year, they expect inflation, i.e. the 12-month figure, change in the CPI from, say, June 2022 versus June 21, August 22 versus August 21, September 22 versus September 21, and so on, to be above, to be elevated. But by the time you get around to March 31st of 23 versus March 31st of 22, the expectation is that inflation would have moderated by then. And that is where the projections come from. With the war that is underway in Ukraine, and with the impact that is likely to have on commodity prices, at least in the short term, it is quite possible that inflation could be, for the fiscal year, could be higher than is in this assumption. But that's the nature of, we put in a table in the budget in February of each year. Our macro projections come from the central bank, and they're based on the best estimates at that point in time. And as I mentioned, prior to the crisis in the Ukraine, the 12-month projection for March 31st of 2023 over March 31st of 2022 is what we have here.
Could you answer the second part? If interest rates continue to rise, the BOJ's interest rates, and they have signaled that they intend to use that policy instrument, what provision is made to deal with the additional debt servicing burden? Okay. Based on the debt management strategy document, a 1% increase leads to an additional $6.5 billion in both domestic and external debt servicing costs. So if we continue on a trajectory of above average, the 4-6 band inflation, and the BOJ continues to raise interest rates, what is in the budget to, as a buffer to ensure that we can still manage debt servicing?
Okay, first, just on the assumption behind the question, That figure about the impact of a 1% move in interest costs relates to if the interest that we pay across the board, across all categories of debt, was to increase by 1%, then yes, the impact would be as you have quoted. But recall that a large portion of our debt is fixed price debt, right? So we have bonds that have already been issued and the coupon rate is X, and that coupon rate does not change if interest rates go up. We have debt to multilateral institutions at fixed prices. That doesn't change if interest rates go up. We have debt at fixed prices to Jamaicans, and that doesn't change if interest rates go up. And the profile of maturity of the maturity profile of our debt is such that we don't need to raise huge volumes of debt in the next fiscal year. So that one, I wouldn't advise you to rely on that indication for the impact on the budget if rates were to move by 1%. And first of all, I want us to be on the same page as far as that is concerned.
I would assume, though, that the Ministry of Finance, because this is page 23 of the medium-term debt management strategy, would have accounted for that, exactly what you would have said. Absolutely. In their own projection. So if you look at page 23 of this book here, I assume they would obviously take into consideration what is fixed, what is variable, what is external to Jamaica, what is internal. And their own projections indicate that an increase in benchmark interest rates of 1% leads to a 6.5 billion. So I assume they would have taken that into consideration.
Right. No. So the language probably could be a little more precise. That is providing a kind of, if we were to look at our overall debt and if rates were to move by that amount on the universe, then that's the result. In relation to what's happening here domestically, when you look at the stock of variable rate debt that we have already made provisions in the budget for an increase in interest rates on the variable stock of debt, domestic debt that is outstanding. Now, bear in mind that the relationship, those are market-determined rates, right? So our debt is priced based on 90-day Treasury bill rates, which is a market-determined rate. When the policy rates adjust, the market will adjust the 90-day Treasury rate. So a provision was made for what the projected market adjustment of the 90-day Treasury bill rate will be. Now, we have sensitivity analysis that if that market rate is a little higher, then it could result in higher debt service. But we don't believe that the variation. Well, let's leave it at that. So there is a provision for a movement in the 90-day Treasury bill rate, but it is based on best estimates at the time it was put together.
I would also assume that there would have been a calculation on the external US dollar denominated debt on the assumption that central banks, particularly in North America, are also raising rates, which would impact our debt servicing costs.
Well, no, central banks raising rates. You remember that abroad, if US dollar or external interest rates rise, remember that most of our external obligations are fixed rate, right? So we don't, no, but not to U.S. policy rates. So I'm saying, no. So if U.S. policy rates are adjusted, I'm saying the vast majority of I'm not saying all, but the vast majority of our U.S. dominated debt is fixed rate. However, if we have to raise new money in the year, then it would come at a higher rate. But just bear in mind that the overall interest bill, overall debt service is about $138 billion. And $138 billion, it would not be out of the certainly over the last several years. It would not be out of the ordinary if you have to make an adjustment during the course of a year on that $138 billion provision in the order of a 3% variation one way or another. That is to be expected. You're never going to provide the exact amount that you're going to use. But I don't think, with the provision that we have made here, I don't think there's any cause for alarm that we could be way out of the water. I mean, the usual adjustments will likely occur. We'll never get it because things are market determined. But in this grand scheme of $138 billion, if later in the year we have an adjustment of $3 or $4 billion or $5 billion, it has to be seen in the context of $138 billion. It represents a 2% or 3% change or 4% change in the overall debt service number. But to answer the fundamental query that you're asking, we have made some amount of provisions for the environment in which we are, and those provisions too are guided by input from the central bank.
Just on the question of external interest rates, the medium-term debt management strategy analysis indicates that there is substantial sensitivity in the external debt portfolio to interest rate movements. I think somewhere in the close to 30%, not quite 30% of the external debt stock is variable rate. A lot of that will be LIBOR-based interest rates, which will be impacted by movements in the Fed's basic overnight rates. I noticed that in the budget, the provision for, or the allocation for interest on the external debt is, I think, $5.6 billion less in the coming fiscal year than it was in this year. And yet we've had indications from the Fed that they intend to start increasing interest rates, which will affect LIBOR. So I was wondering if you could just explain that reduced allocation for interest expense on the external debt. Take into account also not just likely interest rate increases in the US, but also the exchange rate, which is likely in keeping with past years to see some depreciation each year, which will impact that number as well.
So the point I'm making, just for the viewers, people who are watching and listening, a change of 1%, the point I'm making, in the context of the total amount we pay for interest. In this year's budget, it's about $138 billion. And we're saying a 1% move, in aggregate, if you put everything together and even assume that some of the fixed rate stuff would move, could be the order of magnitude that was quoted, $6 billion, which in the context of $138 billion represents, in the context of, in absolute terms it's a big number, but in the context of 138, it represents a modest shift percentage-wise. We have had some redemption of US dollar debt between last fiscal year and this year, not redemption, amortization. That could account for what you're observing. I don't know if I'm answering your question by pointing that out.
Well, you might be. I'm asking you, what is the basis upon which you're budgeting allocation of $5.6 billion less for interest on the external debt in the coming fiscal year relative to this year? That's what I'm asking. Given that you do have variable rate in the portfolio, there is some sensitivity to international interest rates going up, and there's also some sensitivity to depreciation in the currency on external debt payments. So I'm just asking, what is it?
So I can assure you, remember that, we didn't start calculating interest on debt yesterday. This is something that the unit in the Ministry of Finance has been doing long before my time, and will be doing long after my time, and they're very good at what they do. The observation that you have highlighted reflects the change in stock of debt in that, and the profile in that we have had US dollar debt being redeemed and amortized, and we have a slight change in the mix as well, right? We'd have in the last fiscal year, we'd have had multilateral debt coming in at a lower interest rate, and we have paid off high interest rate obligations. In the grand scheme, though, you know, a change of that magnitude, again, I point you to the base, you know, relative to the total stock of external debt is not that significant.
Related to the impact of that, I want to just ask a question related to the foreign exchange depreciation. We have seen in the last couple of weeks a slowing of the depreciation based on fairly heavy intervention by the Bank of Jamaica, about 300 million since the beginning of the calendar year. The question I would ask is, how sustainable will it be for the BOJ and the impact on our NIR to maintain that level of intervention? It has probably, I think we're about a 1.5% depreciation since calendar year, but that was heavy intervention, which has impacted the NIR. So I want to know how sustainable are those types of interventions in the medium to long term?
Right, so that's a question that is best directed to the BOJ. But I think I've heard the governor say that that level of intervention is not sustainable over a long period of time. A lot of it was related to satisfying the demands of big end users, including energy end users and so forth. But I think he has answered that question in the public domain.
I will hold my other questions to, I don't have members go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. I just wanted, on the revenue estimates, and I see you've changed a lot of pages today, but I don't think this has been impacted. I'm just going to rely on the revenue estimates that were tabled, but I think that the miscellaneous item on page 10 of the revenue estimates, miscellaneous receipts, extraordinary receipts, where the figure for that line was 8.2 billion for this fiscal year, and you're projecting 17.8.
Give me the page again.
The page 10. There's a new page 10, you know, but I don't think it has changed this number. I was just looking at it.
Yeah, that is a classification of items that we couldn't put anywhere else.
It's a very substantial jump from fiscal year to fiscal year, from 8.2 to 17.8.
Yeah, we can do some. We can get back to you on that.
I'd like, if you could, please, because I think it's a material part of how you're financing the budget. And I don't think it is to do with the divestment proceeds, because that's separately accounted for. Yeah. No. Yeah, I have. In the fiscal policy paper, Minister, 2 questions on it. I see some new pages tabled, but there's just a tidying up thing. In the chart on page 14 of part 2, yes, where there's a projection of the real GDP growth rate going forward for this year and then in next 3 years, fiscal years after that. In the text on the prior page, it says that for the fiscal years 2023-24 through 25-26, which is 3 fiscal years, the annual real GDP average is 2.2%. But if you actually look at the table on the next page and you average those 3 years, it's 1.8%. So I don't know which is correct, but that needs to be looked at. Obviously, that's an important projection. And
no, it includes 22-23. It is correct. Add those 4 numbers, divide by 4, you get 2.2.
No, the text says 23-24. It doesn't.
Oh, it should
doesn't
say
say that.
22, 23.
Well, it's wrong.
Yeah, it should say 22, 23.
Because if you don't exclude that first year, you get a different average. You get a lower average.
I agree.
Yeah. The other question I had relates to the to do with the compensation of employees. In the table on page 4 of part 1, we have what looks to me to be a roughly $44 billion increase in wages and salaries, roughly 19.6%. But on page 21 of part 3, it describes the increase in, well, it describes compensation of employees as being $290 billion. So it's quite a big difference between what is shown as 267.7 billion in this table versus what is in the text on page 21 of part 3, which is 290. I don't know if that change, if that's fixed in a, or explained in one of the new pages that you've tabled today. But there's a difference of.
Is that include employers' contribution? Yeah, but we have 265 here. That's an error. Yeah, that I think the number in the table is a correct number. At first, I was wondering if the number on page 321 on page 21, part 3, inadvertently included employers' contribution. Okay, we don't normally put that as, that's not in the wage bill. It's a tax that goes.
That wouldn't be.
So that it seems as if those two were added to give you the number on page 21 of part 3. In any event, the number in the table is the correct number.
The number in the table is the correct number.
Yeah.
That's best. So yeah. And the last question I have on this is, in the table on page 20 of part 3, it's the same page there, where you're anticipating a 10.8% increase in tax revenue, $65 billion more of tax revenue for this coming fiscal year over the prior year, over this year ending. I noticed that the nominal GDP forecast for this year is 9.7%. So you're forecasting an increase in taxes with no apparent new measures of 10.8%, which is ahead of the actual nominal GDP forecasted increase. I was wondering if you could just explain why that seems to be a reasonable forecast.
Okay. So the first of all, those two numbers are within the same sort of ballpark. But how tax revenues are forecasted, they're forecasted line item by line item. And it's not always going to be exactly related to how nominal GDP grows, because there are certain things that are not. For example, I'll give you a big example. A big example would be the tax on tourist arrivals, what do you call it, the airline tax, which was virtually zero last year. That's a tax that's normally $8-9 billion a year, and it went down to a couple hundred million last year. So you go from a couple hundred million to 8 billion. That particular tax item goes up by several thousand %, and that can mean that the overall increase in tax revenues does not align perfectly with nominal GDP growth. Departure tax is what it's called, I think.
Oh, the departure tax, yeah.
And the room tax and all of those. Those will not go up with overall average GDP. Those are.
But I think the biggest forecasted jump is on GCT.
No, but in dollar terms that will always be the case.
Yeah.
But in percentage terms, so some of those.
But that other tax you're referring to is a relatively small sum in terms of if you're looking at the overall increase in the gross tax collections year to year.
Yeah, but it is those variations that explain the variation between overall tax increase in percentage terms and nominal GDP growth in percentage terms. The percentages don't align, and I'm giving you an example, because there are tax types that will grow much faster nominal GDP growth because of what is happening in the underlying sector. And the perfect example is the departure tax and other tourism-related taxes, room tax and GCT and those taxes and so on. We had a shutdown in that sector, and we have had a return to growth, thankfully, and those numbers are growing by orders of magnitude way in excess of nominal GDP growth, and so they influence the average growth.
In terms of the gross revenue numbers, I don't think that's can explain the entirety of it, but I agree that must be one element of it. So you're just saying essentially it's just line item adjustments that.
Remember, the difference is just over 1%. Right?
Between nominal GDP.
Right.
Yeah.
So 1% of, let's use the average number, 600 billion. What's 1% of 600 billion? It's 6 billion. So I'm saying to you, departure tax went from a couple of $100 million to right.
Seeing that line item in.
You're not seeing departure tax? Well, let me see if I can find it for you. It's in.
Page 2. Yeah, it must be in. It's not in page 1.
It's here somewhere, just to find it.
Yeah.
Travel tax or passenger levels?
Yeah, look at travel tax. Travel tax gone from 3.5 to 11 billion.
That's 8 billion difference.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a huge, that alone, if everything else were that alone would explain it. That's more than 1% of revenues overall.
I mean, there are other tax types that are forecasted to get lower, but yeah. All right, thank you, Minister.
So, may we commence deliberation?
To OPM? Yeah.
So we commence deliberation. Really? It couldn't be, that's general.
Yeah, so now
No,
to
that
OPM.
was general.
We're now to
Let's
the
move on. We will now commence deliberation on Head 01000, Office of the Prime Minister.
All right. Good.
I'm Pierce.
Very accessible. Hot mic, I can't turn off this mic.
In terms of OPM, and I would ask, I see the Minister with responsibility for the needs, could you indicate the rollout date for the cards, when persons will actually start to receive them, and the process that will be employed to ensure that persons can register, etc.
Okay. Thank you, member. We are targeting the second half of this year, early, the second half of this year, to start the process of rolling out the identification cards. The intention is to start with a pilot program that will be run across Kingston and St. Andrew, and we will have enrollment centers. We are partnering with the Post and Telecoms Department so that we maximize existing resources. So we will be setting up enrollment centers across some of those spaces in Kingston and St. Andrew and start with that initial rollout so that we can, zone in on the process. People will actually go to the centers, bring some of their foundation documents and be enrolled, get their cards. And once we have finalized that, looking at the process, then we will roll out island-wide, and we expect towards the end, going into early next year, we will have that island-wide rollout.
Is there a plan to use the existing electoral offices which are in constituencies as part of that rollout exercise?
Yeah, so we're looking at, I would say, 3 main agencies, entities to help and partner with in that rollout exercise. Post and Telecoms, so our post offices across the country, and the network is extensive, or RGD offices. Again, we have offices in each parish, and yes, our electoral services. But I would say in that order.
Wait a minute. Minister, on the Jamaica disaster, your vulnerability reduction project, the programming of it, I've seen that you've been, this project, there's a suite of projects that has been included for the last, over the last period. When is it projected that we'll be able to reprogram or look at other types of projects for this multi-year project?
Yeah.
So, sorry, you're asking when? It's scheduled to be completed by June of this year. There is just an extension to June of 2022.
So in the next budget cycle, we could be looking at other.
We'll be looking at other programs. Yes.
Okay. All right. Good.
Head number 16,000, Office of the Cabinet.
No, you have to put. Don't you have to put those? No, but he said cabinet. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Cabinet. Sure. Is there any questions on that?
So team, questions would be directed at OPM in general, and then when that is concluded, we just take the entire pages of
he's now
that
at Office of the Cabinet.
Okay? Yeah.
So
Right. So I'm saying, right.
the Office of the Cabinet now is what the chairman, if there are no Julian, that's just. So can we take OPM and Office of the Cabinet?
Yes, you can.
No, you have to ask.
Sorry, Chairman, I think you could call for page now. You could have approval for cabinet since that has not been the. What of the Governor General? Head 1,000. That.
Well,
Right, so we deal with everything from 01 straight to 1,500, yes?
16,000
To
16,049.
Yes.
To be precise. So everything from the beginning to head 16,049.
Put the page 01 to
16,049.
6.
All in favor?
All in favor? Any against?
$20,000. But I have some questions here for finance. Minister, in relation to the public sector compensation review, I just have a couple of questions. First, what will be the status of collective bargaining agreements which would have carried into the next fiscal year, where you would have already agreed to certain salaries and allowances going into 22, 23, 23, 24? That's the first question. Secondly, are public bodies included in the overall public sector compensation review? And then thirdly, how are you treating with employees who would have had non-taxable allowances? Because I know you indicated you're eliminating a number of allowances, moving them from allowances to salaries. How are non-taxable allowances going to be treated?
Okay, so on the first question, certainly for central government, we have agreements with public sector unions up until March 2022. So it's not as if we have agreements going forward that are going to somehow be in conflict with the compensation review. Meaning the bargaining period, they're synchronized. All of them end March 31st, 2022. With respect to the second question on public bodies, the idea is that the principles behind the review are to be extended to public bodies. The alignment that will take place in this fiscal year will be focused on central government first, but the expectation is that the principles behind the review will incorporate public bodies and that they will ultimately be a part of the review exercise. But there's no mistake about it. The heavy lifting will begin with central government first, where we have over 100,000 employees. With respect to non-tax allowances, I just want to make it unequivocally clear that no employee in the public sector will be worse off as a result of the compensation restructuring. So to the extent that current compensation includes a non-taxable allowance and the restructured compensation does not include a non-taxable allowance, the restructured compensation on a net basis will not be lower than the current compensation on a net basis.
Minister, we haven't been privy to any of the details in terms of what are the likely adjustments. In looking at the public sector compensation, the total compensation package, you have about 18% increase between last fiscal year and this fiscal year. The question I would ask, just taken as an example, if you take somebody at the high end of the rung, like a permanent secretary, as an example, what expectation should that band have in terms of the type of increase that they should expect? And then if I take somebody at the lower end of the rung, like a constable in the police force, what expectation would that person have in terms of the kind of percentage increase?
Okay, so first of all, the figures under in the wage and salaries lines in the estimate of expenditure include a reclassification of certain expenditures that would ordinarily be in the program's line item of the budget, even though it relates to compensation. As a historical practices, certain allowances and certain major allowances for legal and historical reasons were included in programs and not in wages and salaries. So some amount of that lift that you're seeing is relating to, yes, what do you want to call it? Reclassification, right? Other amounts relate to a change in amount, so to speak. Now, what we have done, remember, is that there has been a very detailed exercise that's taken a few years to have a single job evaluation system where all jobs are scored and in a consistent way, and a new scale is developed or has been developed based on those scores. And instead of having this 325 scale, we're going to have a much more manageable scale, and there will be a transition from the old into the new. And it will result in differences in levels of adjustment, right? The compensation restructuring, though it will lead to levels of remuneration that that exceed current levels, it's not to be seen as primarily a salary increase exercise. It's a restructuring. Okay. Now, one of the challenges that we have had with public sector compensation over a long period of time is that we have not been able to we attract, or sometimes we can attract at the entry levels, but we're not able to retain the experience and the talent over time, and that is because there is a great deal of compression at the middle to the top end of the public sector. So we expect the stretching at that element of the public sector to reflect the fact that we want to be able to attract and retain.
No, I'm fully aware of the rationale, fully aware. What I was asking, because no details have been shared, is even in percentage terms, I would expect that those who you're trying to retain, small amount, highly technical skills, generally at senior levels in the civil service, would end up with, in relative terms, a larger increase than those who would be at the lower end with larger numbers, who you still need to retain, nurses, teachers, policemen, etc., but in relative percentage terms, a small increase. So I do understand the rationale. I'm just asking in terms of if you can give an indication of an expectation, if it's a PS, a chief technical director, somebody at that level, what would be the expectation?
Right. So yes, we're on the same page as to how one can describe the changes that are going to occur and the stretching. It probably wouldn't be appropriate, though, member, for me to say that here before I have a chance to say it to the permanent secretaries or to say it to the people concerned. You wouldn't appreciate it if you were in their position.
So you will answer my question then.
I'm not going to draw my tongue today.
But I would say, on a serious note, certainly I can say from our side as an opposition, we haven't been privy to any of the details of, this is a major exercise and one we support, but certainly I think it's important for stakeholders to be brought into the process to at least understand the thinking.
Strong response of our markets in the U.S. and North America in general, and certainly rebounding in Europe, particularly the United Kingdom. We are fully cognizant of the new ominous clouds that are gathering in elements of the market, in particular in Eastern Europe. But we are comforted by the fact that much of the repositioning of crews and other tourism activities are favoring the Caribbean, and Jamaica will benefit in that way. I say that very reluctantly, Madam Chair, because we never want to feel that we should benefit from adversities, but these are some of the realities that we have. The final area that I wanted to mention in my preliminary is to indicate the strong response that we've had from the sector and the way in which the entire tourism fraternity has come together and has collaborated to enable this recovery. The kind of cohesion, the kind of policy, collaboration that we've had from within and without, the alignment and the extent to which we have had virtually a single messaging coming from the industry with regards to what needs to be done, in particular to manage the COVID situation, to enable protocols to be understood, but more importantly, complied with. And I'm proud that Jamaica has established itself as a strong leader in this area and also in the area of building resilience. Jamaica is today the #1 country in the world driving the strong values of tourism resilience. So, Madam Chair, the budget is before the committee, and we ask for the examination and approval.
Thank you, Minister.
Minister.
Members?
Yeah, thank you.
Member Hilton and then Member Guy.
Yeah, Minister, you last year, of course, consistent with the fallout in the sector, a number of projects that were set on the TEF and other programs would have been affected, or some of the planned programs not proceeded with. What is the plan for this fiscal year going forward? How will those be addressed? Is there some sort of prioritization for those who were left off from last budget year going forward?
Right. So we took note that there had to be quite a bit of repositioning, and particularly to change focus to deal with a lot of the problems that we had to solve emanating from the pandemic, and some of the issues as it related to the situation of our stakeholders, and so some of the capital projects that were scheduled, as you correctly said, we've had to move slowly on. But they are back, and the budget is reflecting that in terms of the beach development program, the enhanced highway and road attractions projects that we have. We're looking at the hip strip, the expansion development program for Montego Bay, and a number of infrastructure projects around the resort areas. Certainly in terms of the spruce up programs, that I think members of parliament would appreciate, that one went apace, and we intend to increase to 4 million this year to enable more of that local value added for the industry that we need, that will come from the communities themselves and driven by the priorities of those communities.
Minister, thank you. I'll follow up on where the member left off. You did indicate, and you have sat in this chair for many years, and each time we come to this committee, I keep asking about Paji.
Yes.
The beach in Paji. I want to get a further update or a new update.
Yeah, I think you are on the list. The beach development program is going apace this fiscal. We have $225 million earmarked for beaches development, and Paje is on.
Minister, it was this. I'm hearing this almost like an exact replica of what you said last year.
Okay,
except for the 225.
But you accepted that procurement and so on would have had to take place, and that process has happened.
All right.
So we'll come back next year, right? And I'm sure you'll be smiling at that point.
Well,
that Paget is, or as a matter of fact, you'll invite me.
No, certainly.
To Paget to open it.
All right, Minister, you 17,007 page. You in here it is 430 million for seed risk support.
Oh yes.
And if you go below on Brand Jamaica, well, let's deal with that one first. In light of what is happening with the pandemic, is this more than what it was last year in terms of our pre-COVID levels in terms of the citrus support that you're giving? Because if you are intending to have more visitors come here, certainly that is part of the marketing program.
Right. Except that you'll appreciate that the provision for seed support is in relation to non-traditional routes. For example, when we're breaking into new markets,
Ukraine,
or there are areas that there's a demand, but currently there is no airlift arrangements. So the good news is that the driving elements of our market thrust this year is the United States. That is perhaps the most connected market to Jamaica, and arguably Jamaica is the most connected destination to the U.S. in the Caribbean. Out of the UK, we're getting very strong, direct flights from Virgin, from British Airways, and the other charters that are coming are within the range of the support that we have given over time. Now, the question you probably really want to put is, will this be adequate to deal with the new markets that we're going into, and what kind of support we may have to give to break into the Middle East market, the Levant countries, the GCC countries, and beyond. So your point is a good one. We think that these numbers will be adequate to deal with the initial engagements that we have. And if there is need for any further, it will be later down in the fiscal year, because we don't expect that the new markets will kick before winter of 22-23. And that would take us into the next fiscal year.
If I may follow up, Minister, I see here where your budget for overseas marketing has remained basically flat from 2021 and the projection for 22-23. We recognize that there has been a deficit in terms of arrivals as a consequence of the pandemic. But is this sufficient to try and reclaim and recoup what was lost and for new markets?
Right. So it's a good question, because budget for advertising and promotion, as you know, is always inadequate. I'm the first to say that, and it's known. But I think it's a tribute to the JTB. It is a tribute to JTB and the efficiency of that department, that over the years we have with almost a flat, as you say, budget. And you could see it from 2019, we haven't changed. And yet we have had the growth levels that, have been at an exemplary level indeed. In fact, Jamaica Tourist Board is one of the most efficient tourism bureau in the entire tourism circuit. And I say that without fear of contradiction or equivocation. We've been cited almost every year by the World Travel Awards for the efficiency of the JTB. And so we know that we have to manage better. We know we have to be more efficient, and we utilize technology to a better extent now. When I brought in the new director, it was that in mind, because he had no background in tourism, but he had a strong background in internet and the Internet of Things and the digital technology. We knew that that's where tourism was going. So we are able now, for example, when we went to the Middle East last week and we met with the Emirates, we were able to bring out data from Amadeus, which showed that Jamaica had over 800,000 impressions in the Middle East. which means that this is an important base on which we can have discussion with large airlines about coming into this space. So the technology is working, and it is enabling us to have greater efficiencies and to use our budget more effectively.
Minister, how is the local supply chain integration going? There have been challenges in the past in terms of supply from our local farmers, etc., to the hotel industry, and so have we ironed out those kinks, and what are the projections moving forward?
Oh, good question. It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress because what we have to do is to build the capacity of our local supply chain to respond to the very strong demand that tourism brings, bearing in mind that tourism's demand is not seasonal. It's a 24/7 demand, and therefore we have to build the capacity for supplies with the sufficiency, with the adequacy, the quality, and the price point that will enable us to have confidence built that when you come to Jamaica, you can get good local supplies continuously. And so that capacity is a function of not just what we do in the ministry, but it's a joint-up approach. It is what agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture has to do, and we're working with them. It's what the manufacturers have to do. So we're working with now Minister Hill, previously Minister Shaw, and the teams. We have established the linkage network, which has all of these partners on board. So we're working on it, and the investment side. And just to make the point that when I go, yes, agriculture, we mentioned that agriculture, and now young Minister Charles is on board. And we have put funds in it. The Tourism Enhancement Fund during the period when the tourism industry went almost flat, as you know. The TEF was there supporting the farmers who had supplies, surplus supplies, because the industry was down. And we have programs with the World Bank, the Ready To program, which is to encourage small farmers in the rural areas to supply for tourism. But we use technology also. We established an app called Alex. And what that app does is, by the use of the smartphone, the farmer in the field can connect with the procurement section of the hotels and can move products to them almost simultaneous as they talk, so that we are in a better position to find out what is available, what prices there are, so that the hotels can have fresh Jamaican fruits and vegetables on an ongoing basis.
Much of your effort that has been publicized has been in the Middle East, some of the effort at least. The new markets, and those are long-haul markets. Well, let me ask you the question. The kind of support infrastructure that we'll need, because if you're talking about long-haul carriage from the Middle East.
Excellent.
Are the support infrastructure in place in Jamaica to realize those benefits in the short to medium term?
Excellent question. And part of the discussions that we're having is about investing in that infrastructure need. And you know, Vernon Field is a discussion, and one that is gaining much more legs now, especially that we are trying to position Jamaica as a hub, the aviation hub for this region coming out of the Middle East. So the long haul with larger equipment, you know, more sophisticated equipment, the A380s and other such mega equipment that are being used, can't land here in Jamaica as yet. So what we are using, for example, is going to be the 777-200, and that can land here. It only takes 300 odd passengers, but for the leg coming to Jamaica, it could only take 260, because only 80% of that capacity could land in our area. But it's a start, and it's the same situation you have in other countries in the Caribbean. So you ask an excellent question that is requiring serious work. We discussed multi-destination tourism as a strategy to bring other regions together with us, to bring other countries in the region with us in the process. So we're doing that now, and we're hoping that in the long run, we will have a full-fledged connection with all the top and most efficient and modern equipment possible coming into our region. In the short run, we will have to suffice with the smaller but effective and efficient 777-200 and other equipment within that range.
Could I just ask a question? It's not directly your portfolio, but it hinges on what you just said. The expansion of the runway at Montego Bay,
yes.
What is the projected time frame for that completion, and what would it do in terms of the types of aircraft, in terms of capacity that would be able to land?
Right. So we are hoping that the end of this fiscal, the new fiscal here, right, would see the completion of that runway. The effect of a completed runway with the length allows us to bring these larger equipment in, the ones I mentioned, but not to the level of the A380s and so on. Part of the problem, well, not problem, it's probably a good thing, is that the technology now is allowing for shorter runways to accommodate larger, yes, equipment. But it is how the runway is built. It's its ability to take the load, you know, and so one of the reasons that Vernon Field is an exciting new prospect is that the way that runway was built. It was built for tanks and for really heavy artillery units to land on it. So with some fixing, it will be in a good position, I think, to take the heavier equipment that are going to be coming from long-haul areas. So your question is that we will have, hopefully, an extended runway there. There's expansion going on at Norman Manley as well to make those two airports more appropriate for the type of equipment that are now going to be coming into our space.
Minister, it's 17,010.
Yeah. 10.
Yes, Minister. The Milk River Rehabilitation Program.
Which?
The Milk River Rehabilitation Program. It's under Product Development Activity 12502.
Yes. Your favorite, Milk River.
I knew you were going to anticipate, and
yes,
also Vernon Field.
Yes. Well, I spoke to Vernon Field
you know?
a bit. I can't go further on Vernon Field, as you know.
So what does this project entail? What is because the main priority issue, yeah. Yes, Minister, until the mic is switched on, the main issue for us at Milk River is the condition of the road, and I'm sure you have received those complaints. And I believe that unless we do something that provides a better access to the facility, then the facility will continue to underperform.
Right.
Right.
So the 10 million that's there is for the building. It's to improve, you know, the building. Bearing in mind that we are in the process of divesting through whatever means the enterprise team recommends, and that's coming. However, the question of the access road, if you notice on the roads to attraction, we have an allocation. We haven't stated it there as clearly as you might have wanted to see, but the road to Milk River is included in that for this fiscal year.
That is on 17,009. That is under the Tourism Enhancement Fund.
Yes.
That is what you're referring to, Minister?
So I'm being corrected. It is 30 million for the repairs to the Milk River bath and building, and then there is a figure to be told with regards to the road. We have to get that estimate from NWA in order, but the provision is made for it.
I believe an estimate was sent a few days ago.
Well,
so
sufficient unto the day.
Minister, in respect of the same Milk River bath, I remember last year in the throne speech, the Governor General would have mentioned that certain steps would have been taken in respect of the act and You know, I know that perhaps over time, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and you have to shift focus, we were not able to address it here in Parliament. But how soon do you think we can bring this matter to the Parliament?
Well, I must tell you that we pretty much down the wicket with the act. The real problem is the divestment process, which is a very elongated one, as you know. And is it DBJ? DBJ handles these, and I can't say very much more at this point, except that it is in train. It is in train.
In closing, in terms of my contribution here, Minister, I believe it is important for us to acknowledge that you have done tremendous work over the past financial year, and sometimes you have to give credit where it is due. And the tourism ministry is one of those that faced a lot of challenges in the pandemic, and I believe that you did exceptionally well as minister then, and I hope you do the same this year for the upcoming financial year.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Member. Appreciate that comment. And I pass it on to the sector, because I think that element of commendation should be laid squarely on the shoulders of the workers of the industry and the stakeholders in general, and the team of the ministry, you know, around my permanent secretary and the chairman of the agencies and the boards and everyone. And in some little way, God helped me to contribute a little bit, and so I give thanks. Yes.
Minister, it sounds like you're making a nice wrap-up conclusion, but I see the hands of Member Wright for some time trying to ask a question. Member Wright?
Well, nice.
Go ahead, Member Wright.
Nice that you're protecting the opposition members.
Members.
Okay.
Member Wright, go ahead, please.
Minister, is there any specific tourism plan for Westmoreland, given the task that the zones of special operation in place to assist in the crime mitigation?
Well, I think, Member, your general question with regards to the parish of Westmoreland. No, please, allow, I think you have a duty to protect the members of the opposition. We have a total of about, about 182 million to be spent in the parish of Westmoreland for tourism. The Canaan Well, we have, not there. We have the Negril, the road to West End to do. We have the median to do in Negril. And we also have to work with the water, what's the name of the attraction in your area? Petersfield. Roaring River, that's correct. The Roaring River, which we have on here. So there are provisions for you in this budget, Member. And we take note of the energy that you offer in terms of representing your constituents.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Member Wright, you have another question? Member Wright, do you have another question? Your mic was on again. Thank you very much. If there are no other... Member Hilton.
I want to make one further point, which I think the member would be interested in, is that under the resort town squatter settlement upgrading, we have 15 million also for work to be done in the Negril area. And so I think that is of interest, since he asked about the parish, and it's really magnanimous of him as a member for Central Westmoreland to ask about the entire parish. Well done, member. Yes, but
question, please.
Member Hilton
from Grange.
Member Hilton, and then Member Garvey.
Minister, the resilient corridor was a response to the exigencies of the COVID-19. I took note of the fact that there was a launch in the Middle East of the program. Now that we there is a, well, I can't say the virus is not still around, but the measures are falling away generally. What of that resilient corridor project remains?
Right.
As a project?
Right. Now, first of all, I think we have to recognize that the pandemic is not over, and that as long as there is a vaccination gap anywhere, the incidence of new strains are very likely. So we do not pull down our guards. We respond and we are open to the extent that we allow, more traffic, but we are also very careful that we keep the protocols as much as possible because we're still in a pandemic. The Resilient Corridor has become a worldwide recognized, safety bubble. The need for a bubble in the context of the removal of restrictions or the significant reduction of restriction is not as critical as previously. However, Jamaica has made a point to the world that we do have a corridor, and that corridor will remain. And as a matter of fact, it's not a corridor, it's some corridors. And those corridors will remain because they were strong marketing points for us. And what they did was to build confidence in the destination. And with that confidence, we do not want to disappear simply because we're doing better in managing the pandemic.
Will Kingston get a corridor?
Well, Kingston now is okay. As you know, Kingston doesn't need a corridor anymore. Kingston will benefit from the general relaxation of protocols as announced by the Prime Minister to commence today, as a matter of fact. So we all, and I want to make the point that the tourism sector is responsive to this in a very positive and responsible way. We are not taking lightly the fact that these restrictions have been relieved somewhat. We are continuing to manage the industry in the way we did to insist and to require that the protocols be maintained in all our areas. Certain elements of it we know would go because of how the restrictions themselves have been relaxed. But there are certain basic things that will remain, especially elements of sanitation. Very, very critical.
Member Garvey, please.
Yes, Minister. Some years ago, maybe about 10 years, the process of refurbishing and putting in place a tourism project in Sligoville, the first free village, commenced. However, over the year it has languished, primarily because there has been confusion between the Heritage Trust and the persons who would have had a recollection of whether or not it was originally a one-story or two-story building, the Great House that is. I would have come to you subsequently as well on at least 2 occasions, hoping to follow up on that project, which was crafted by TPDCO, and subsequently nothing has happened. You gave me your word that you would have given it favorable consideration. It is the first free village, and outside of what happens in the Resilient Corridor, that these pieces of heritage, these pieces of what makes Jamaica, Jamaica, the first free village, really and truly requires us to step up to the plate and ensure that we preserve that part of us that is true and authentic Jamaica. Mm-hmm. Can you kindly advise me on how we will move forward on this?
All right. Well, I must say that it is true that a number of these projects were, shall I say, put on hold in the context of responding to the COVID challenges. This year, we've put back $100 million in the budget for heritage sites. And so we'll be reviewing and looking and visiting the sites that we had our eyes on before. and I know member that's Sligoville, and that area is on my radar, as you know. And so I give you the assurance that attention will be given to that area, along with a number of other areas. But one of the points that I want to make, if I'm allowed, team, is that when we put these kind of investment into these sites across Jamaica, it's critical that it's sustainable. It is critical that they are maintained, and it's critical that they are managed. And I find that it is a waste of public resources to just go around fixing these sites and then they go into ruin it. So we are going to be very careful in this round to make sure that the management systems are in place and a structure to enable sustainability is put in place before we put $1 on any of these heritage sites around.
I look forward, Minister.
Okay.
Yes, member, right. You may go ahead.
No, it's when you're right, you can't be wrong, so go ahead. Well, I heard you, the impact of the Ukrainian war on us. At the moment, there is no visible impact, but what I can indicate to you is that the potential impact is very, very strong, and is not something that we're ignoring. The fact of the implications of the war in terms of the supply chain disruptions, in terms of fuel costs, in terms of access to airspace and general movement, these are the factors that drive tourism. So to the extent that they are challenged, then movement to us is also going to be challenged. I indicated earlier that fortunately for us, because of where we're located, we tend to now benefit perhaps from repositioning, for example, with cruise. A number of the large vessels that were in, the Balkan areas, and particularly in Ukraine and other areas around Eastern Europe, are now being repositioned in the Caribbean. So we will see, a benefit there. The fact that and the North Americans who would normally go to Europe, immediately for vacation, they would want to look to closer destinations such as Jamaica. So while there are some benefits to accrue, it's not a benefit on which we praise ourselves or we preen or indeed we boast about, because we do not enjoy the benefits from adversities. And the pain of others must not be the blessing of ours. So I just want to make the point that, yes, we keep our eyes wide open on every element within the tourism space at the moment. In fact, as chair of the Global Resilience and Crisis Management Center, I made a statement with that regard a couple of days ago, that the entire industry must keep its eye open, while at the same time must start advocating for peace and security to be restored in those areas, because they will have a deleterious effect on tourism worldwide.
Thank you, Member Cousins.
Minister, when we were discussing the Milk River situation earlier, I believe Mr. Wallace, who is the CEO, was not here from the TEF. So just to ensure that he's aware that of the 245 for road to attractions, that some is to be allocated for the Milk River, rest to Milk River Bath Road repair, correct?
Yeah. All right. Just to let you know, the way we do business in tourism, you see, it's like weekend, Friday and Saturday, all day we spent on this budget. We went through every element of things to be done, and Milk River was among the subjects. So just be assured. So whether he's here or not, as long as this minister tells you that, you're good.
Thank you. If that is all, thank you, Minister Bartlett and the team from the Ministry of Tourism. I am going to now take head 17,000. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against, oh, sorry, let me say head 17,000 pages 1 to 11. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it.
Thank you.
That is
the
end of your
Chair.
wonderful ministry. Thank you, Ministry.
Thank you.
Minister Tufton and the Ministry of Health and Wellness, along with Ministers Juliet Cuthbert-Finn, will be up next. Members, we will take a 10-minute recess to allow members. I don't understand, you know. No, they have been trying for a while. Members, we are going to take a 10-minute recess at most. Please refresh yourselves so that we can continue with the remaining proceedings. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.